Well, just so I can explain to you a little bit about what's going on, if you see any audience shots this morning, you'll see that there's even less people than usual here. That's because I'm recording this early in the morning. We have a guest speaker today, and we wanted to be sure to get this up. So today we're going to talk about heading for the exits and some of the things that have been going on in the past week that indicate, at least to me and to a bunch of other people, that we live in a very momentous time of history where all these various signs that the prophets told us to look for in the end times seem to be converging. And this week was no exception, although I think there's a lot of hype associated with one of the events, but I think it's something that we need to talk about. So I'm going to read a verse that I read last week to kind of put things in context. In Matthew chapter 24:9, and this is something that I think is one of the biggest harbingers that we live in the end times. And they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. It sounds there like Matthew was reading his Facebook account or his Facebook page. And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And this is a description of a lot of, unfortunately, prophecy forums, I think, right now on Facebook groups, prophecy groups on Facebook. First thing I'm going to talk about is apostasy in the church, briefly. I'm going to talk about some developments in the area of transhumanism that are frankly shocking. I will talk about some things related to the Orlando shooting, what happened in Great Britain, United Kingdom this week, and then we'll talk a little bit about Israel and the Middle East. So it's a lot to cram in. So this is if you had any inkling that the PCUSA was still marginally orthodox in its theology. This is from the PCUSA National Conference, and they have a prayer. And I have to take off my glasses to see this one. It says, they're having a joint prayer, and they repeat this refrain a number of times, and it says this: may our grief be more than sentiment, and our amen more than words. God, lead us on that our work may transform our neighborhoods into communities of inclusion and peace. Now, you don't have to know much about the PCUSA to know what they mean when they talk about inclusion. But one of the most stunning things that happened here was in the midst of this, these different people you see on the stage here leading prayer, this man on the right stands up and he gives his prayer. And it goes a little bit like this.
الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Oh Allah, bless us and bless our families and bless our world. Lead us to the straight path, the path of all the prophets, Abraham, Ishmael and Isaac, Moses and Jesus and Muhammad. Peace be upon them all. Amen.
So, a Muslim comes to the PCUSA convention and prays to Allah. And you will notice that he identified the prophets as Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jesus, and Muhammad. Now, the PCUSA has apologized for this, but my question is, how did it happen in the first place? What were they thinking when they brought in an imam to pray to this all-merciful God? By the way, the same language that all of the signatories of a document called a common word, a Christian response to a common word sign. A number of leading pastors like Warren and Hybels and others signed this a number of years ago, back in 2008. They used the exact same language that the imam did here. This is not a prayer to the same God. This is what in Old Testament would be called an abomination. Now, a number of years ago, I did a video called Streams of Ecumenism with Tim Worth. You can find that on YouTube. And part of it was to show how evangelicals had now bought into this unity with Rome. And one of the people that we were critical of in that process was Beth Moore. And Beth has responded to some of her critics. She gets a lot of criticism because of the way she handles scripture sometimes. And so here is her response, and I'll just probably let it play without comment, just about 30 seconds.
It is absolutely shameful. Brothers and sisters slandering one another. We have come to a place where it is not if you get out there and really do what you've been called to do that somebody might talk about you. No, girlfriend, they are going to, and they're going to do it publicly. And how quickly are you going to back off? That's the question. How quickly? Because the first little time you get a little argument, now it doesn't mean we just go steaming ahead in our pride. Sometimes we have to listen and go, okay, what's the merit to this? What is the value to this? But I'm just talking about if every single time.
Okay. Now, listen, I wanted to make one definition for her that she may not be aware of. Criticism is not slander. Slander involves saying something that is not true. And it's about time that people, if they're going to get critical of their critics, need to understand what the words they're using actually mean. And I think this is indicative of a problem. I don't have time to go into it anymore today. Well, there were a lot of things that happened this week. There were these floods in West Virginia that were happening. There were floods in Europe. There was severe weather that they were afraid were going to affect the vote on the Brexit resolution. This flooding, you see this house on fire rolling down the creek in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, near the Greenbrier Resort. It was, I think, the last I heard was, 26 or 27 people had died in flooding in West Virginia. They had a large amount of rain in a very short period of time. And, of course, when you're in a mountainous area, and having grown up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, I know what happens. The water runs off. And I remember when I was, shortly after my parents moved from Johnstown, they had a bad rainstorm. I think they got about 8 inches of rain in 10 hours. And the water just accumulated and ran off the hills. And some friends of mine said that a block from their home, they had a 25-foot wall of water come rolling down the street, a street that I drove on many times when I was young. So this is a big problem. There are major fires going on in California I don't have time to talk about. This is an interesting thing. This transhumanism, people like Martine Erdman and Patrick Wood talk about this. This is the front cover of the Economist that just came out yesterday or Friday. March of the Machines, a special report on artificial intelligence. And we're going to see this more and more. Now, this used to be sort of under the radar, but they don't even hide this anymore. And I'm very concerned about the direction that this is taking. I do think it is prophetic. I think people think, well, we're going to fix everything. We're going to make man better. We're going to have everything. At the same time that The Economist is doing this, Time magazine has a cover article this week called The Gene Machine, and it talks about a thing called CRISPR, which is going to be able, and you can see a graphic here on the bottom of the screen, how it's going to be able to go through and edit and replace parts of human DNA with these things. Here's a little video. There's no sound to this, but talking about the sequences and the genes and the human chromosomes. Great video that they did in conjunction with this CRISPR thing. This video is actually a couple years old. But what they're going to do is they're going to take this machine, molecular size machine, and they're going to run it through your DNA, and it's going to alter DNA. And this is to be done to, of course, correct DNA problems, to do away with disease, to make your life better, to make you live longer, and all of these sorts of things. It's stunning technology. It's being developed at a pretty rapid pace. It's being talked about more and more openly. They recently had, I'll play a clip in just a moment, of a symposium that they had at the Forbes 400 symposium on technology or innovation recently in DC just a couple weeks ago. And so this is just sort of a picture of how they'll splice out part of your DNA and put in new. Now look, if your car doesn't operate all the time because it's not necessarily designed the best way, I don't have a lot of confidence that there are not going to be some major problems with this technology. Although implementing it sounds to me, aside from the we're going to beat people into God's thing, it does seem to be the Lawyers Full Employment Act for the next generation or so, assuming the Lord doesn't return. And so, I always have mixed emotions about these things because I love new technology, and lawyers, we have to admit, sometimes we love the problems that come along with all these things. And I just don't think that this ends well. This is a talk that a lady named Jennifer Kahn gave recently at a TED forum. They give these short little 12, 15-minute talks. No, they're not part of the evangelical church. Those are called sermons now, those little 12, 15-minute talks. And she said, gene editing can now change an entire species forever. And she talks about maybe, doing things to make all of the male carp in the Great Lake. We have a problem with Asian carp. So we'll make those, all those carp male, and they won't be able to reproduce. Here's just a little talk from this summit on philanthropy, part of the Forbes 400 Summit on Philanthropy. Listen to some of the things that are said there. To me, I find this chilling.
So for people who haven't been paying attention, CRISPR is this amazing new technology that allows you to do genetic engineering with an ease in human and plant cells that was not possible. And I think this will be the first time that it's actually used in people. Yeah. This is unprecedented.
But then the ability to edit cells to make them better than nature made them.
In other words, this has huge theological implications, and this is not necessarily, I would not consider this a good development. An ethicist, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel at the University of Pennsylvania, said this: "We are probably behind the 8 ball on addressing the questions that gene editing raises from an ethical standpoint." And that's an understatement. There was recently a forum that discussed this, I believe just last week or this week, at the Council on Foreign Relations. You can find those videos on YouTube. And I was watching one of the ladies talk, and she just said, we've been operating under the radar, and every time we get together, we raise these questions about ethics, but nobody ever really does anything about it, except they go forward and develop the technology even more. But you heard what he said. We're going to change the DNA better than nature did, better than the Creator. This has huge theological implications. This is Tower of Babel type stuff in my view. And I do think it plays into all the end time scenarios. I do think it's coming. And I don't know how far God will let people go down that road before he intervenes. I suspect that he will intervene and stop it at a much earlier stage than the people proposing it do. Well, let's talk a little bit about Europe and just step back for a minute. Well, before I get to Europe, I want to talk about this, because this is kind of an interesting thing, and it kind of plays into a legal thing. This week, there was a split court, I would call it a split Supreme Court non-decision on the immigration issue. What had happened is that the Obama administration had enacted various rules and regulations about what people could be put on a track to citizenship. It flew in the face of what Congress had put into law. It was really overreaching. It was so bad, and it's led to some ethics charges against the government attorneys involved in the case down in Texas. The Texas court, the lower court, eventually said, this is so bad, we're going to put an injunction on the Obama administration. You can't do this. Now, that was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court took the decision when there were 9 people in the Supreme Court. But as you know, Justice Scalia passed away earlier this year, and now all of the decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, a lot of them are 4-4. So what happens in a case when it's a 4-4 decision is the lower court ruling stands. So they appeal the injunction to the government. The Obama administration appealed the granting of the injunction against their implementation of these immigration rules to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court considered it, and they came down to a 4-4 vote, 4 to overturn the injunction, 4 to leave it in place, which means that the injunction stays in place. So with this split court until there's a 9th justice appointed, and as long as Justice Ginsburg's cryogenic chamber holds out, there will be at some point 9 justices on the Supreme Court again. But until then, we're going to have a lot of these split votes, which means whatever happened in the lower court will stand. Now, some of the circuits are much more what I would call conservative, original in their constitutional interpretation than other circuits. For example, the circuit court where Texas is very conservative, fairly conservative. But a circuit like the 9th Circuit out in the West, California and other states, is very liberal, and they're going to be very, to them the Constitution is sort of whatever they say it is that particular day. So there will be victories like this. Now, this really only applies in the district where the injunction took place, although the Obama administration can't do anything elsewhere to violate it. So this is a victory, but by the same token, if a court does something very unconstitutional and it goes up to the Supreme Court, it's going to be a 4-4 vote, which means the unconstitutional action of a court like the 9th Circuit is going to stand. And this is a big problem. This is a thing proposed in California. It is called the Equity in Higher Education Act, Senate Bill 1146. And essentially what this is going to do, it's designed to shut down religious institutions that have standards in the state of California. For example, the law says it prohibits a person from being subjected to discrimination on the basis of specified attributes, including sex, in any program or activity conducted by a post-secondary educational institution that receives or benefits from state financial assistance or enrolls students who receive state student financial aid. So if you take any money from the state, you're now subjected to these regulations, even though I think they're clearly overreaching and unconstitutional. It says this chapter shall not apply to any of the following educational programs or activities offered by an educational institution that is controlled by a religious organization if the application of this chapter would not be consistent with the religious tenets of that organization. Now that sounds good, but I want to explain why it's not necessarily good. And it goes on and lists several of these. Programs or activities to prepare students to become ministers of the religion, programs or activities to enter upon some other vocation of the religion, programs or activities to teach theological subjects pertaining to the religion. And this is the problem with the liberal left in the United States, is that the First Amendment of the Constitution prohibits the federal government, the government, from interfering with the, quote, free exercise of religion. Now, religious people know that their religious beliefs permeate everything that they do. But what the liberals are doing now, and with some support in some courts, they are saying that freedom of religion just means freedom of worship. You can worship, but once you start acting out in the public, you're subject to everything that we say. That completely tears the First Amendment apart. And that's why I personally think this election is very important. Because if you're concerned about things like the First and Second Amendments, there is one candidate that will continue to destroy them, will appoint judges to destroy them. And to me, that's sort of a major issue. And I have friends that disagree. I also want to point this out. There's a lot of controversy about this thing that happened out in Idaho. There are reports that a 5-year-old girl was raped, urinated on by immigrants. There's been reports that they were Syrian immigrants. And of course, once this is reported, everybody comes out and they're very careful to say that they are not Syrian immigrants. Now, checking with some people that live locally out there, they indicated to me that 2 of the immigrants were from Sudan, and I don't remember where the other one was. They were 4 boys, and I'm going to read this because I find this to be chilling as well. The U.S. Attorney, WorldNet Daily has been covering this, and so I can't say whether the story is absolutely true or absolutely false. Indicators is that there was an incident that happened out in Idaho, and the U.S. Attorney for that district, appointed by Obama, has come forward with a statement, and I want to read part of that statement. It says this: the United States Attorney's Office further encourages community members in Twin Falls and throughout Idaho to remain calm and supportive, to pay close attention to the facts that have been released by law enforcement and the prosecuting attorney, and to avoid spreading false rumors and inaccuracies. Of course, we want reporting to be accurate. I agree with that. Grant Lobes is an experienced prosecutor. Craig Kingsbury is an experienced law enforcement officer. They are moving fairly and thoughtfully in this case, said Wendy Olson, U.S. Attorney for Idaho. As Mr. Lobes and Chief Kingsbury informed the public, the subjects in this case are juveniles. So there is a case, are juveniles ages 14, 10, and 7. So that's been accurately reported. The criminal justice system, and this is where I start to get into, I'm very concerned about where this is going, because this is consistent with appointees of Obama. You might remember a couple years ago, there were people, they were talking about a mosque down in Tennessee, and the U.S. Attorney down there threatened prosecution of people who opposed that, even though they were opposing it through speech. And I thought we had free speech in this country, but not according to people like this. She says this: the criminal justice system, whether at the state or federal level, requires that juveniles be afforded a specific process with significant restrictions on the information that can be released. The fact that the subjects are juveniles in no way lessens the harm to or impact on the victim and her family. So there is a victim. She has problems. They have suspects, 14, 10, and 7. The spread of false information, this is where I'm concerned. She says this: the spread of false information or inflammatory or threatening statements about the perpetrators or the crime itself reduces public safety and may violate federal law. This is where this is going. If you speak out against this stuff, you are going to be subject to prosecution by people like this. And listen, I know this from personal experience. The thing that you should fear most in our government system is not a rogue president or a do-nothing Congress or an out-of-control Supreme Court. The person that can mess up your life more than anyone is a prosecuting attorney. Because they can bring charges against you, and you can spend your entire life savings defending you against false charges. And it is a weapon. There are ethical restrictions on them. But look, we have the case in Baltimore. What have they had? They've had 2 cops go on trial in the alleged Freddie Gray killing. 3, and all 3 have been found not guilty. Not innocent. They've been found not guilty. And yet the prosecutor there, I believe, will insist on prosecuting the remaining ones, even though she brought her best cases to the front at the beginning. It becomes a political football. And so those are the people that you need to be really concerned about. You need to be concerned about people like Loretta Lynch. Now, Loretta Lynch came out and this week talked about, we're going to release the transcript of the shooter's 911 calls in Orlando, but we're going to remove certain things. And she talks about, and so here's Ramirez did a great editorial cartoon about this subject: manipulating info and redacted Orlando transcript, transparent as possible. They were going to remove all things related to that mentioned where he mentioned Islam or anything else, because that would inflame the situation, I suppose. So someone suggested, I think it was Ramirez also, suggested that maybe the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice should be, he put some duct tape over their names, and so they should be called the Department of Redaction. Because what they want to do is control speech. It was not, what was it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that a certain president went to the United Nations and said this:
"The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam."
And this is what was going. In fact, before he did the speech, the Obama administration and the Department of State under, what's her name, Hillary Rodham Clinton, current candidate for the Democratic Democratic candidate for President of the United States, had signed on to a resolution at the UN, resolution, it's either 1618 or 1816. I've got a slide here in just a minute. Ramirez also has a great editorial cartoon about what's going on. You see their heads in the sand, now they pop up and say, yeah, guns are the problem. And this, what they're doing is they're in my view, they're enacting sort of a soft Sharia law where you can't criticize or talk about what really is the problem. We have an Islamic terrorism problem. It exists for people who are not peaceful Muslims as well as peaceful Christians and peaceful secularists and peaceful humanists. This is a problem, and until we talk about the problem and look at it, we're never going to make any get it solved. Sebastian Gorka has a new book out called Defeating Jihad. He thinks it can be defeated. He was interviewed on Fox the other day, and he had this to say about what was going on with Loretta Lynch's redaction of the transcripts.
She wasn't going to admit it today because they were caught red-handed at the highest level, at the cabinet level. This is what we've been trying to deal with now for 7.5 years. The administration has been censoring the reality. They sent, 6 years ago, the White House sent a letter to the then Attorney General and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. There must be censorship of all counterterrorism training in federal government. You must not mention Islam. The word jihad must be removed. That was 6 years ago. People didn't believe it. What happened yesterday? Smoking gun. At the highest level, after the biggest attack since September the 11th, the decision was taken to censor the reality, the actual words of the terrorist. And I think it was the furore, just 3 hours worth of pushback, and they said, oh dear, it's a little bit too much.
And he's exactly right. This is what's happening. Things are being censored. I'm concerned about it. He also talked, I think, in that interview about this resolution. This is 1618, put through the General Assembly a few years ago when Secretary of State was Hillary Clinton, combating intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of and discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence against persons based on religion or belief. And that's not the U.S. Constitution. That's a UN resolution, but what you see is people like the U.S. Attorney in Idaho, the U.S. Attorney in Tennessee, and others trying to implement this through their law. And I personally believe it's blatantly unconstitutional. Sebastian Gorka mentioned this. If you remember, there was a purge of all the training materials to remove all references to Islam. Eric Barger has a great talk on this. You can find it on his website. I highly recommend that you get it. Phil Haney talks a lot about this in his new book, See Something, Say Nothing. He's interviewed on Jan Markell this weekend as well as last weekend, Understanding the Times. I would highly recommend that you listen to these shows, that you get Eric's materials, because you will understand that there is this move. But even though they removed all references to Islam from the training materials still talk about religious extremism. Now, it does mention Sunni Muslims. This is from a Homeland Security presentation. But look who's at the top of religious extremists. Evangelical Christianity. Above Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood has been proven to be a terrorist organization. I don't know about any evangelical Christians. So Loretta Lynch came out. She had some comments. Here's some further comments of her about the Orlando shooting.
Well, in the review that was being done in terms of making those available, the goal is, of course,
Okay, what happened was they got the transcripts and they noticed that all references to Islam were redacted. And she was asked, okay, who did this? How did this happen?
greatest transparency possible. The initial thought was we did not want to provide a further platform for the propaganda of the killer. But once it became an issue, we decided that we would go ahead and release the full transcript, which is out now. So you should have that.
Well, you know, if her conduct and her statements were the only...
This is Michael McCasey, former U.S. Attorney General, when we had real Attorney General.
Manifestation of the administration's position, you could sort of dismiss it as almost harmless psychobabble, but unfortunately it's not. This is part of a kind of larger pattern of trying to bleach out or white out any part of Islam that people think promotes violence or promotes the kind of behavior that we saw in Orlando. And that this has been ongoing for a long time. When Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, this administration co-sponsored a resolution in the United Nations that urged member states to criminalize any statement that promoted, among other things, controversy or hatred of religion, whether the statement was accurate or not. And the administration takes the position that that resolution is international law, and they have assiduously gone after any attempt to use the word Islamic terror as part of our description of what is going on here.
I think that, what strikes me is sort of the big picture here is that it certainly looks political. When you're sort of whitewashing, editing, I mean, you and I both know in the courtroom you can't just take words out. And frankly, we don't even know if this transcript is right because it's not authenticated, and there's a lot of reason to be suspicious because they've had such a funny dance unrolling it.
Well,
but
it's not. It's not accurate because they used the word God. He obviously used the word Allah. That's different.
Right. But my point is that when you massage it or manipulate it or play with it or whatever, we've got this other investigation lingering over here, which are Secretary Clinton's emails. And when they display themselves in such a political fashion on one side, no matter what happens on that, someone's going to make a decision on that email, whether it goes to a grand jury or not. And it just invites more criticism of being poisoned and political and everything else you can think of.
Well, there's certainly no law enforcement justification for having edited the transcripts the way they were edited or having edited them at all. So you're then left with that political explanation.
Do you think she's taking marching orders from the White House, or do you think that she's doing this on her own?
Oh, gosh, I'm not, I don't read minds, and I don't want to be unkind to her. As I said, I think this is part of something much larger in this administration. Resolution 1618 in the UN is part of it. Another part of it is the fact that they refer to their counter-jihad or counter-terrorism effort as CVE, combating violent extremism. They don't even name what kind of violent extremism it is. Have you ever known anybody to strap on a suicide belt or pick up an AR-15 in the name of violent extremism? That's ridiculous.
He's right. So here is the sort of another response of Loretta Lynch. You need to listen to this one.
But the message of Orlando goes far beyond one night of unspeakable terror. The message of Orlando that I have seen today, and what the American people have seen in the wake of this horrific assault, is a message of determination to remove hatred and intolerance from our midst, to live our lives freely and without fear, and to stay true to the principles of liberty, justice, and equality that define America at our best. And I am so inspired by the strength and the resilience of the survivors and their loved ones. And I am deeply moved by the way that this community and our national community has stood together in support of one another, in defiance of terror, and in defense of our most cherished ideals. And let us be clear, those ideals include the understanding that our diversity makes us stronger, and that no matter who we are, what we look like, where we are from, or whom we love, this extraordinary nation belongs to us all. Now, I know that the LGBT community, in particular, has been shaken by this attack. It is indeed a cruel irony that a community that is defined almost exclusively by whom they love is so often a target of hate. And let me say to our LGBT friends and family, particularly to anyone who might view this tragedy as an indication that their identities, that their essential selves might somehow be better left unexpressed or in the shadows. This Department of Justice and your country stands with you in the light. We stand with you to say that the good in this world far outweighs the evil, that our common humanity transcends our differences, and that our most effective response to terror and to hatred is compassion, it's unity, and it's love. We stand with you today as we grieve together.
Well, I think those words speak for themselves. The ex-deputy FBI chief was in an interview by the Jerusalem Post the other day, and he said that he said this: racial profiling, anti-Muslim rhetoric, and policing measures that violate civil rights would harm law enforcement efforts to stop homegrown lone wolf terrorists and the gunman, like the gunman who murdered 49 in Orlando last week. He said this, quote, "I won't get into a politician's comments on racial profiling, but I don't think racial profiling is the direction for the FBI to take." But listen, you can go listen to Phil Haney's interview, and you need to go listen to those interviews on Jan Markell, because he will tell you that when he was shut down, he was brought up on internal charges. They tried to prosecute him because he was using the word Islam or Muslim in his investigation as he looked into these terror networks, including discovering, as I mentioned last week, that the mosque that the shooter went to in Fort Pierce, Florida, was part of one of these terror networks. So listen, the Attorney General says love is the way to deal with this. I want you to listen to this testimony about the same day in Congress by this young Yazidi woman. She will speak in her native language, and then it will be translated. This is about a minute long. She was kidnapped, raped, turned into a sex slave by the Islamic State.
If a country as strong as your country cannot protect its citizens in Orlando or in Belgium or in France, how come a small minority like us can protect ourselves while we are in the heart of the land where the radicals are?
أسيرو راسته خلاص كريمة بس أثناء شعر بحرية خلاص كرنيه إجبرها تانوها محاسبة وان مجرمانة هاتيا كرا.
I was freed, but I do not enjoy the feeling of the freedom because those who committed these crimes have not been held accountable.
إيروز بيجم همو أقلية كإيزدي ومسيحي وأقليات ديني ديت كجك هكا حماية وانها هاتا كرين أو أقلية وخلاص بن.
Today I'm saying that small religious minorities such as the Yazidis, Christians and other minorities, if they are not protected, they will be wiped out.
I appreciate the courage of that young lady to come to Washington and speak about the atrocities being committed against Yazidis and Christians by the Islamic State. And it's about time other people in Washington woke up and started talking about it. But this attack on free speech is coming on many levels. Here is a former member, I can't remember his first name, Rodriguez, former Air Force member, retired from the Air Force, who gives a speech at the flag folding ceremonies when somebody retires from the Air Force. I want you to listen a little bit. This is from First Liberty, because he's right into a problem. Listen to this.
Oscar Rodriguez is a decorated 33-year Air Force veteran and a retiree now. And He has a history of giving very stirring and moving flag folding speeches at military events and civic events throughout the community.
One of the individuals that came up to me and shook my hands, he was going to retire. He says, Sergeant Rodriguez, I've heard that speech on CDs. I heard it in person a long time ago. It would just be wonderful if you could do that for my family. And I looked at him and I said, absolutely.
As a private citizen and an Air Force veteran, Oscar has the right under the First Amendment to engage in speech, including religious speech.
To have my fellow family throw me out of the ceremony because of the mention of God is beyond me.
When Master Sergeant Roberson's commanding officer...
Okay, so he's going to an Air Force base in the United States to do a flag folding ceremony where he explains the meaning behind the colors in the flag. You'll see what happens.
...out that Oscar was going to be performing this flag folding speech that was going to mention the word God. He took steps to have Oscar banned from the ceremony, and when he found out that he didn't have the legal authority to ban Oscar, a private citizen, from this ceremony, he then had members of his command in uniform show up to remove Oscar.
I stood up, went to my position, faced the audience, and this individual comes up to me and he says, "You're not going to do this, are you?" I'm thinking, so what is he talking about? That I'm really going to do what? Mention God? Yeah, I'm really going to do that. As soon as I hear my cue, I start with my speech. And they grab me, and they pull me, they assault me as the flag is open because I dare to mention God.
The tragic irony here is that flag folding speech talks about the fact that the United States flag stands for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. And it was those very words that resulted in Oscar being assaulted and forcibly dragged away by men wearing the uniform of the United States Air Force, men who are sworn to protect people like Oscar and their right to engage in that very speech.
It is this one nation under God that we call with honor the United States of America. God bless our flag. God bless our troops. God bless America.
And for that speech, those thugs threw him out and banned him from the base. In America, my friends, I'm telling you, we have a problem. We have fascists in control of our government. They've infiltrated the military. My personal opinion, everyone involved in that should be immediately dishonorably discharged from the service with no benefits. That's my opinion, and you're never going to change it. So let's look at the Middle East. But listen, you see this has now risen to 65.3 million people displaced, the biggest number in history by the different wars all over the world. A lot of them are coming here. I want you to know, though, that even people who are given legal immigrant status by the Obama administration are being allowed to not do something that other people that have gone for citizenship have done. For Breitbart, 18.7 million immigrants, Obama has invited them to avoid the oath of allegiance and pledge to defend America. Unprecedented in history. I know you don't believe it, but it's actually true. The next clip, I'm not sure what this is. Let me just play. I'm going to skip over this clip because I don't have time. Okay. England. Brexit. Divided we fall. This was the headline, the front cover of The Economist magazine a week ago as the election approached. And it was clear that the governing elites and the financial elites and bankers and those sort of things were overwhelmingly in favor of England, Great Britain, United Kingdom remaining part of the European Union. Melanie Phillips, in a column last week, a couple days before the election, wrote, "We're choosing between freedom and serfdom." Look at what she said. The EU has metastasized into a full-blown superstate project. In the intervening years, the damage it has done to core British industries such as fishing, its crippling effect on Britain's economic bedrock of small businesses, and its increasing subjugation of domestic to European law have steadily ratcheted up public fury. The EU's founding principle of the free movement of people makes it impossible for Britain to control its immigration levels. To take the biscuit, anyone voicing such concerns has been largely damned as a little Englander, xenophobic, racist, troglodyte imbecile. The many millions who have thus had these anxieties dismissed and traduced by the entire political class are now spitting tacks over the threats, scares, and sheer contempt for ordinary people issuing from Remain. This political decline has been deepened by the belief that nations are intrinsically threatening because they are governed by self-interest. The only legitimate institutions, this is what the left say, are transnational and thus supposedly committed to peace, love, and the brotherhood of man. Do you see the underlying theme through everything that I'm talking about today? Such EU faux universalism has helped undermine the building blocks of our society by promoting the notion that all cultures have identical value, self-designated victim groups must be indulged in their illiberal demands, and that war is worse than enslavement. Just deal with it in love. You see, the Bible even says that God puts up governments to be a terror to evil. But that's changing. Britain's historic record of inventing and defending liberty and democracy, not to mention the strength of its economy, mean that this week's, it's the 5th largest economy in the world, this week's vote gives it the chance not only to become a democratic nation, but to put itself at the head of the defense of Europe. Freedom or serfdom, that's the choice on Thursday that faces us all. Now, Nigel Farage, who's a member of the EU Parliament, he's head of the UKIP, the Independent Party in the United Kingdom, he even came out the day of the voting, while voting was taking place, and said, we've lost. It's over. We're not going to win. But then the results came in, and it was, in some respects, an overwhelming victory. All the polls said it was not going to happen, but they voted to leave. And so the headlines all over the world, in England and the United States and elsewhere, were talking about all of this happened. Immediately what happened was there were impact on markets. The New York Times, global shocks after upheaval in Britain. Washington Post, Brits vote to exit U.S. Royals Globe. Wall Street Journal, UK vote sets off shockwaves. And they had all these charts on all these newspapers about how the markets and everything went down and that type of thing. I mean, here's just a sample of them. Investors gripped by a panic last seen in 2008. And this was to me the most stunning thing, was this scene outside 10 Downing Street in London. James Cameron, is it James Cameron? Huh? David Cameron. James Cameron's the director, I think. Okay, well, I don't listen to what he says, and I don't watch that guy's movies, so I get him mixed up. Here was his speech at just a short clip of his speech at number 10 Downing Street. We'll start here in a second.
The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. The will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, not least because so many things were said by so many different organisations about the significance of this decision. So there can be no doubt about the result. But above all, this will require strong, determined, and committed leadership.
The bottom line is he resigned, or announced that he would be stepping down as prime minister over the next several months, and another prime minister would come in and negotiate the terms under Article 50 of the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union. People said the power to the people. A lot of people are now demanding that they have another referendum, that we might have voted for that, but we really didn't mean that. We didn't think it would pass. I doubt that these petitions, I hear they're up to over 2 million signatures, but I doubt that they'll be successful. The EU has come out and said, get out of here. Europe is now wondering is this going to be a domino effect? There's even websites up with Italexit for Italy getting out of the EU. And the EU is fracturing. The elites they're going crazy. Felix Salmon on Twitter account said this, he's an author. No words. The dream is over. Britain has voted to fall into the sea. This is the end. And they talk, and by the way, they accuse me of spreading fear and paranoia. I mean, come on, really? Brexit is the most significant political risk the world has experienced since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The New Yorker that will come out next week, says this, an early look at next week's cover, silly walk off a cliff. And so if you voted for it, Christine Amanpour on CNN, of course, she had the reason why you voted against this.
A lot of these leave movements are led by the hard right, very, very xenophobic, anti-immigrant, very populist, nationalist, white identity politics. They thought Nigel Farage was too toxic. And in fact, they have been livid at his posters and the xenophobia and the anti-immigration and the sort of poisonous divisions. If you look at the latest cover of The Economist, and of course another one will be coming out tomorrow, but The Economist, which is one of the preeminent economic and political magazines in the world, has written, "Divided we fall." This is just before this vote. And it's also said that this victory, for which Nigel Farage, the anti-immigrant, xenophobic leader of the UK Independence Party who forced this referendum on Prime Minister Cameron, he is now the spokesman and the face of this victory. And what we're hearing, certainly from people who are worried precisely about this, is that they feel that this marks a victory for the kind of economic nationalism, to quote this article here, for the kind of xenophobia that will imperil the liberal world order that has guaranteed Western prosperity and stability since World War II. And so Europe also is concerned that this is going to have a run on their banks, so to speak, in terms of politically, and that their anti-establishment, populist, nationalist, and in many cases xenophobic parties will also get huge wind from this and try to spin off as well. That is a worst-case scenario that people are incredibly afraid of at this point.
Well, a young writer on the op-ed page of the New York Times, Joshin Bittner, wrote an editorial op-ed yesterday called Europe's Angry Old Men. We, the young optimistic millions across Europe, cannot lose the West to demagogues. Now listen, what, are they going to prosecute this guy for hate speech? Are they going to prosecute Christian Amanpour? Stop this nonsense with hate speech, okay? Toughen up your skin and let's have an argument about it. We, the young optimistic millions across Europe, cannot lose the West to demagogues who have much more in common with the scapegoating culture of the Arab world they so despise than with the enlightened, rational tradition of Europe. In other words, translation, you're idiots, we're smart, you should have stayed. We will most likely look back at the Brexit vote as merely the first in a series of fights for the soul of Europe. The outpouring of anger and anti-establishment aggression in Europe has only begun. We can no longer think of reconciliation between the opposing views of destruction and progress. The angry old men will not be mollified. Their xenophobia cannot be controlled or channeled into constructive cooperation. We, the young, the future of Europe, must punch back. Too much time has been lost already. Okay, what do we make about this in Bible prophecy? Now, one scenario in Bible prophecy is that the final beast empire will be a revived Roman Empire centered in Europe, centered in Rome specifically. Now, I don't know what happens if Italy leaves, but listen, I don't know that this is prophetically significant. This will cause some disruption in the financial markets. It will have an impact on the United States. I think the dollar will get stronger, which will make it harder for us to sell our services and goods overseas because the value of the dollar. So it does. These things do have an impact. There is a loss in the stock market. The value, the overall value of the stock market has gone down. By estimates I saw the other day, $2 trillion has gone down. I don't know that this indicates. And so what's happened is some people who don't buy into an end time scenario within the evangelical church are taking a victory lap. Okay, this is not the first victory lap they took. They took a victory lap back in 1989 and 1990 when the Soviet Union collapsed. They said, oh, see, there's no such thing as Ezekiel 38 and 39. Well, now, who's laughing now, right? Do you see what Russia is doing all over the world? I mean, I have a pile of Russia stuff and potential war in Europe and Ukraine and Poland and in the Middle East. There's already a proxy war going on between the United States and Russia and Syria. I don't even have time to go into that, but listen, the fact that the Soviet Union fell apart, and I know I said this at the time, a lot of other people said, maybe that's not the way it plays out. We'll have to see how it plays out. So everybody's saying, oh, this means that the EU can never rise again. But look, the EU was always a joke militarily. It's a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels that aren't accountable. I saw a video where they went up and they showed people of the European Governing Commission, pictures of people in England. And nobody knew who these guys were. They'd never seen them before. And yet they're running things. So I don't know that it has a huge prophetic impact. It may make Europe shrink and become stronger in the union that they can get together. That's a possibility. But look, the EU has always been a joke militarily. And my understanding of Bible prophecy is that this final beast empire will be a great military power. So I've often said to people, the EU is never going to be a military power for a long time. I mean, they're way down the list, almost all the countries, except for England. The real power over there, by the way, is really, I think, NATO, because that's the military power. That's the military alliance. And so far as I know, there's no indication that England is going to be leaving NATO. So it may lead to a push, but look, it may lead to a push for a new world order at a stronger level. But it's interesting because I'm not sure how, I'm sure the conspiracy theorists who said that everything is pushing to a new world order, all elections are fake, nothing happens, are going to be coming out now and saying, oh, see, this is just a diversion. They're going to go ahead and they're going to go ahead and they're going to let you think you've won, and then they're going to do all this other stuff while you're not paying attention. So let's just stay in the Word. Let's talk about these things, because I think these things are coming, and there are what I consider to be several different acceptable scenarios based on the way you read the prophetic scriptures, and we're going to have to see how this plays out. I try not to be too dogmatic on this point, and I have friends on different camps that are very passionate about it, but just relax, we'll see how it plays out. So let's talk about the Middle East. I mentioned this Russia has directly attacked U.S.-backed Syrians. Newsweek this week has an article about, can ISIS take down Washington? The Wall Street Journal a week ago had a good long article like they do in their Saturday editions on the long war. How are we going to deal with this Islamic problem? In England this week, or in Europe this week, they had a meeting, and they were pushing for Mideast peace. Here is Rivlin, he's the president of Israel, and he went to them and he told them, listen guys, now's not the right time for peace. There's still a lot of things that need to be done. The response of the person standing to him there was that Mideast peace is one of the EU's top priorities. I think one of the top priorities of the EU now has shifted since that meeting took place earlier this week to trying to keep the EU together. Israel is very critical of that meeting that took place, because they're trying to push an agenda to force Israel into a certain decision to come to a two-state solution with the Palestinians. And I believe the Barack Obama administration, for reasons I'll detail in a minute here, is full into this. But one of the things that happened were there were blood libels that were talked about in Europe this week. The Independent ran this story about 2 weeks ago now. Ramadan 2016, Israel cuts off water supply to West Bank during Muslim Holy Month. Now look, there are water problems in Gaza and within the West Bank, but they haven't taken care of their infrastructure. And so they went there, and there was also a guy who showed up at this meeting in Europe to talk about that the Palestinians need this peace agreement. This is Mahmoud Abbas. Now, why this guy has given any credibility, I don't know. He got a PhD from a Russian university. Now, I don't know if a lot of you know this. This man spreads blood libels about Israel and Jews all the time. In fact, here's the title of his dissertation that he did at a Russian university, his PhD. The connection between the Nazis and the leaders of the Zionist movement. In fact, what he said was Hitler really was a Zionist. History means nothing to this guy. He will lie about anything. It's part of what he believes. It's part of how he acts. Netanyahu is critical of this blood libel of Abbas before he went to Rome himself to try to see what he could work out or to put a squelch on some of these negotiations. The Zionist Union confirmed that the head of their party had actually met with the PA, Palestinian Authority, over pre-1967 concessions a while back and offered East Jerusalem, West Bank to Abbas prior to the election in an effort to get elected. Caroline Glick, I really don't have time to go into this. You can go to the Jerusalem Post, you can read the column for herself called Explaining the Israeli Left. And she has a response to what was said about Herzog. And listen, what Caroline says about the Israeli left applies to the left everywhere. And I think it's an article, we'll put a link up in the show notes or show description, the YouTube description, so you can watch that. This editorial the other day in the Jerusalem Post, Jews in Israel in a threatened, leaderless, and delusional world. And boy, does that ever encapsulate. It sounds like they listen to the prophecy updates here at Fellowship Bible Chapel. I don't know, but I'll close with this. I want to go through what Caroline says in her column on Friday, Obama's Money and Israel Sovereignty. I have a short clip of her from her speech at the Jerusalem Post conference, and then I have what I would consider to be kind of a positive, upbeat thing to end with. I know, you're going to say, I don't believe it till I see it. He's going to run out of time. I won't see it. I will get to it. Obama's Money and Israel Sovereignty. Listen to what she says in this. This week, MK Michael Warren, used to be ambassador of the United States, stood up to his boss in the Kaluna Party, Finance Minister Moshe Kalan, to the political left, including hundreds of retired security brass and to the IDF General Staff. The former ambassador to Washington urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to sign the multi-year security assistance deal that U.S. President Barack Obama demands Israel accept. So it's expiring, and Israel, gets military assistance from us. We get technology from them. It's sort of a quid pro quo, but Obama wants to really change the terms. Listen to this. The problem isn't the money. By all accounts, Obama's multi-year military assistance package is generous. The problem is that in exchange for the expanded military aid, Obama is demanding that Israel surrender its diplomatic and military independence to the White House. Yes, that's what she said. Israel haters in the U.S. speak endlessly about the supposedly all-powerful and malign Israel lobby, which controls U.S. foreign affairs. This is a conspiracy, Zionist, Jews control the whole world thing. But the simple truth is that it wouldn't matter all that much if AIPAC were to shut down tomorrow. Even without AIPAC, Israel would enjoy the support of Congress. It would continue to enjoy the support because the vast majority of Americans support Israel and expect their representatives in Congress to support Israel. In other words, the Israel lobby is none other than the American people. As Warren, Obama's military assistance package would disenfranchise the American public when it comes to U.S. policy towards Israel. The agreement bars Israel from asking the Congress augment the assistance that Obama has offered and bars Congress from acting. In other words, what Obama is doing, and he's doing this in a number of areas, he's putting things in place, agreements and other things like that the next president won't be able to overturn or undo. This is a huge problem. And look, don't tell me the guy's stupid. He's very clever. So if a future administration chooses to breach the agreement or to suspend it, or if conditions change and Israel requires other assistance, Congress would be barred from stepping into the breach. This is unconstitutional. But they don't care about that document. It doesn't mean anything to them. Get that through your head. Then there is the assistance agreement's assault on Israel's military independence. Currently, the U.S. allows Israel to use a mere 25% of its assistance at home. As a consequence, the main beneficiary of use of U.S. military assistance to Israel are U.S. defense contractors. The deal that Obama is now trying to coerce Netanyahu to sign will require Jerusalem to give up the 25% of the military assistance it is now allowed to spend at home. In other words, they're allowed to spend 25% of stuff by industry within Israel. And this agreement says, nope, can't do that anymore. It all has to go to the United States. Or know that such a concession will cost thousands of Israelis their jobs. An Israeli agreement to spend all future U.S. military assistance in the U.S. would be tantamount to an Israeli agreement to concede its military independence to the White House for a fistful of dollars. Without the independent capacity to develop and produce defense systems, spare parts, and munitions, Israel will be unable to take military action without White House approval. This is an attack on the sovereignty of the nation state of Israel. Obama's own record makes clear what Israel would be risking. 2 years ago, during Operation Protective Edge, Obama initiated an unofficial campaign, an unofficial embargo of missile transfers to Israel. He also barred planes from landing at Tel Aviv at Ben Gurion Airport for a time. Huge economic impact from that. Aside from Obama's terms themselves, the most distressing aspect of the current fight over Obama's defense deal is that the IDF, senior brass, and active duty and reserve supports Obama. She then goes on to talk about two documents that have been published recently. One is a security system for the two-state solution. The other is Security First, Changing the Rules of the Game, both done by a conglomerate of think tank type people, political elites, IDF generals, and that type of thing. Security First is supported by former Defense Minister and Prime Minister Ehud Barak. The Security First, let's look at these. I'll just give you a quick summary of these. Security First says we need to adopt the Arab Peace Initiative, and this is from its website. We think this is good. This is a thing that we should do. Comprehensive peace agreement and ending the occupation. This is coming from a lot of generals within the IDF. So listen, you think we have a problem with thugs in our Air Force that won't let people speak about under God and on an Air Force base? Well, they have similar problems with these people in Israel as well. Among other things, the generals call for Israel to administratively divide Jerusalem. Does that sound like something that comes out of Bible prophecy? The Arab neighborhood should be administered by an Arabs-only municipal authority that will operate within Jerusalem City Hall, but be autonomous in its decisions. The generals also call for a complete cessation of all building activities in Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria. In other words, we've got to make the West Bank Jew-free. That's the only way that this happens. Residents of these communities, they recommend, should be pressured to abandon their homes. Here's a page from the Security First document, a plan of action to extricate Israel from the current dead end and to improve its security situation and international standing. Look, everybody talks about the two-state solution. They'll never do it. They'll never do it. They'll never do it. But Netanyahu may not be in power forever. The next government may actually do this, and I think that there's some support. I've mentioned this in Ezekiel 35 and 36 for a two-state solution. It won't work. I'm not saying it'll work. I'm just saying it will happen, and it may trigger a lot of other events that we associate with the end times. It talks about gaps in the security defense. Security First document also talks about Jerusalem, a ticking bomb or a ray of hope. Then there is the other document on the two-state solution. Listen to this. This is just number 2. I just pulled this at random out of there. Actually, I didn't pull it at random. It's one I thought was a very important point. That's why I put it in. What would be the status of the Jordan River and Jordan Valley? The study offers a number of options, but the authors believe after a multi-year transition period during which Israeli forces would redeploy, the most realistic option would be for American forces to remain in a 2-kilometer security zone west of the Jordan River and east of Route 690. American forces, combined American UN force, you'll read in other parts of the document. I'm just saying, the nations of the world are gathered together to divide my land. God doesn't like that. I'm just telling you. And now they have supported people in Israel. To this end, the report purports to build a multi-layered system that addresses Israel's security concerns and in which Israel retains the right of self-defense as well as the capacity to defend itself by itself, but ensures that this is only necessary in extremis. And who determines, this is Caroline talking, who determines whether Israel has reached such an extreme situation? The Americans will. The basic premise of the CNAS paper is that the U.S. military will replace the IDF as a guarantor of Israel's survival. Does this not sound like something that people have been talking about in Bible prophecy circles for some time? That someone will step in and guarantee the peace? It does. Is this it? I don't know. I'm just saying it's unprecedented. It really hasn't happened before. U.S. forces will patrol the Jordan Valley along with the Palestinian forces, which they will train. This was published just last week, this document. It has some kind of goofy charts about how to handle the crossing of the Jordan River between Jordan and a future Palestinian state. It also has, to show how complex this is for little tiny Gaza, it has all these things about what they got to do to allow them to have a harbor and airports and that type of thing. It has a section on here called Transition Process After an Agreement. And it says this: the key to any transition plan, I apologize I don't have this blown up, I just didn't have time. The key to any transition plan will be twofold. For Palestinians, they will need to see a realistic end to the occupation and real and visible changes on the ground quickly that credibly demonstrate that change is happening. For Israelis, they will need to know that there's no arbitrary timetables that would force this. And Kerry was announcing this week, front page Jerusalem Post, quartet likely to recommend bilateral talks. Let's play just a short clip of Caroline at the Jerusalem Post conference in New York last month.
It's time, just as we're doing in Israel, it is time for the free people of the world to seek out, as you do, the sources of information that you know are not lying to you, that are independent, that are not selling you a bill of goods, that are not being bought and paid for. You have to be willing to seek it out, because unfortunately, as time goes by and as the threats against us mount, truth is becoming harder and harder to come by, as our anointed ones would rather blame their political opponents for the threats arrayed against their country than look the enemy in the eye and say, we have to stand as one against you. I'm extremely worried, I have to tell you. This is the 5th year that we've been hosting these conferences, and I have to tell you that today I am very, very worried. After I read Ben Rhodes's article, it wasn't that he told me information that he didn't know. It was the triumphalism of it. It was that he was proud of what he did. So that he wasn't capable of understanding that what he did was wrong, and that this can't go on. That was a truly frightening thing for me. This nihilism, this notion that it doesn't matter. What difference does it make? It makes a difference. It makes a difference. You know, the shortest book in the Bible is Obadiah. It's 21 verses. And it essentially says, right, that Israel is going to stand and we're going to survive, and the people who are siding with our enemies are not, because we stand for the truth. And the people who stand with us aren't just standing for poor little Israel, they're standing for civilization. And when we talk about fighting BDS, when we talk about fighting jihad, when we talk about fighting for free markets and trade without barriers and discrimination, what we're talking about is a way of life, not only of Israel, but of the entire free world. And
she's right. So here's the positive thing. Look, I don't have time to go into this because we're over time, and We have Dr. Ed DeZago coming to speak here this morning. But this regathering of Israel back in the land, it is an unbelief. They are not perfect. They are committing abominations, but God is preparing them for a time in front of our eyes. And so I found this song. There is one place in the world in which you do not escape, nor do you immigrate. You come home, the land of Israel. And I'll close with this, this video.
Left it all to be with you. Distant dreams have now come true. Walk the streets of legends told. We've come home. We've come home. We've come home. And we'll never stand alone. After 2,000 years, we are home. Not a native of this land, bring me up and take my hand. Sapphire seas and golden sand, a place called home. We've come home, we've come home to a land of our own. After 2,000 years, we are home.
So look, just as the prophet Ezekiel prophesied in Ezekiel 36, God is going to bring them back. He has brought them back in the end time. Not because they deserved it, but because his holy name was at stake. Let's remember that. Let's pray. Father, thanks for your word. Lord, I pray that you will gird us up. Help us to stand for truth in the face of the evil, the nihilism, and other things that we see in the world today. Bless us as we go this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
We've come home, we've come home.